The shovel hit rock-hard earth with a sound like iron striking bone, and Clara Brennan felt the jolt travel through her arms to her very core, but she refused to stop digging. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Texas Panhandle in the summer of 1883, turning the air into something thick and oppressive that made every breath feel like work. Clara wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of rust-colored dirt across her pale skin. Around her stretched acres of cracked, parched land that looked more like the surface of some distant, hostile planet than anything that could sustain life. The earth was so dry it had split open in places, revealing deep fissures that seemed to lead straight down into hell itself. "You are wasting your time, girl," old Mr. Henderson called from where he sat on his porch across the road, his voice carried easily across the still air. "That ground has been dead for 5 years. Nothing will ever grow there again." Clara did not look up. She had heard variations of this same statement from nearly everyone in the small town of Redemption since she had arrived 3 weeks earlier. The land had belonged to her mother's brother, Uncle Thomas, who had died alone and bitter after watching his crops fail year after year following the Great Drought. He had left the property to Clara in his will, perhaps out of spite for the family that had abandoned him, or perhaps out of some desperate hope that someone might succeed where he had failed. She drove the shovel into the ground again, using her foot to force it deeper. The earth resisted, compact and hostile, but she felt it give just slightly. Sweat ran down her back, soaking through the practical cotton dress she wore. Her hands, already blistered from days of work, screamed in protest, but she ignored them. Clara had come to Texas with nothing but a single trunk of belongings and a leather satchel filled with seeds. She had left behind a life in Philadelphia that had grown unbearable after her father's death, and her mother's subsequent remarriage to a man who looked at Clara in ways that made her skin crawl. The inheritance had been unexpected, a lifeline thrown across the miles, and she had seized it without hesitation. The seeds in her satchel were precious, carefully saved and traded for over the past 2 years. She had varieties of corn that supposedly could withstand drought, beans that required little water, squash that had hardy roots. She had studied agricultural journals in the library, reading everything she could find about farming in difficult conditions. She had talked to old farmers at the market, absorbing their knowledge like the dry earth might someday absorb rain. Everyone in Redemption thought she was a fool. The town had nearly dried up along with the farms around it. Half the buildings on Main Street stood empty, their windows dark and their doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. The general store remained open, run by a weary couple named the Johnsons, and there was still a saloon, because men would apparently drink whiskey even as the world crumbled around them. A small church stood at the end of town, its white paint peeling, presided over by a circuit preacher who came through once a month. Clara had been staying in a boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson, a widow who seemed grateful for the company and the money Clara paid for her room. Mrs. Patterson had tried, in her gentle way, to convince Clara to give up on the land and perhaps find work as a teacher or seamstress in town. But Clara had not come all this way to give up before she had truly begun. She worked until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if they had not seemed so much like a reflection of the scorched earth. Her hands trembled as she finally set the shovel aside. She had managed to turn over perhaps 20 square feet of ground, breaking up the compacted surface and loosening the soil beneath. It was a start, nothing more, but it was something. As she gathered her tools, Clara became aware of someone watching her. She turned to see a man sitting astride a dusty brown horse at the edge of her property. He was silhouetted against the setting sun, making it difficult to see his features clearly, but she could make out the outline of a wide-brimmed hat and broad shoulders. "Can I help you?" Clara called out, trying to keep the exhaustion from her voice. The man dismounted with easy grace and led his horse forward. As he came closer, Clara could see him more clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30, with strong features and eyes that were a startling shade of blue-green, like the sea she had left behind. He wore typical cowboy attire, sturdy trousers, a worn cotton shirt, leather vest, and dusty boots. A bandana hung loosely around his neck. "Name is James Wilder," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I work at the Triple Bar Ranch about 10 miles north of here, been riding past this property for years." He paused, looking out over the broken earth. "Saw you working, been watching you for the past few days, actually." Clara stiffened slightly. "Watching me?" James held up a hand. "Not like that. I mean, I ride this way regular, checking fence lines and looking for strays. Could not help but notice someone finally working this land. Heard Thomas Brennan's niece had come from back east." He looked at her directly, and there was no mockery in his eyes, only curiosity. "Everyone in town is taking bets on how long before you give up and leave. Then I hope you did not wager against me," Clara said, lifting her chin, "because I do not intend to leave." A slow smile spread across James's face. "Actually, I did not bet at all. Seemed to me that anyone stubborn enough to come all this way and start digging in this ground might be stubborn enough to see it through." Clara found herself wanting to smile back but suppressed the urge. "Was there something you needed, Mr. Wilder?" James, he corrected. "And no, nothing I needed, just thought I would introduce myself, and maybe mention that if you are serious about planting in this ground, you are going about it wrong." The words stung, though Clara tried not to show it. "I have been studying agricultural methods. I know what I am doing." "Book learning is fine," James said, his tone not unkind, "but this land requires something more. The drought broke 2 years ago. We get rain now, not much, but some. The problem is not water anymore, or not just water. It is that the earth itself is damaged. The topsoil blew away in the dust storms. What is left is hard pan, clay, and rock. You can break it up, but if you just plant seeds in it, they will die. The ground needs to be rebuilt." Clara felt her frustration rising, though she knew it was born of exhaustion as much as anything. "And I suppose you know how to rebuild ground, some," James said. "I have been working with cattle most of my life, but I grew up on a farm in Kansas. My mother had a garden that could grow just about anything, even in bad years. She taught me a few things." They stood in silence for a moment, the evening air cooling around them. Clara wanted to tell him to leave, to take his unsolicited advice and go, but another part of her, the part that was exhausted and scared and desperately lonely, wanted him to stay. "What would you do differently?" she finally asked, her voice quieter. James looked at the patch of ground she had been working. "First, you need organic matter, anything that will break down and feed the soil. Compost, manure, old straw or hay. You need to work it into the earth, mix it deep. Then you need to plant things that will put nutrients back into the ground. Legumes are good for that. Beans, clover, alfalfa. You let them grow and then you turn them back into the soil before they go to seed. It is called green manure." Clara had read about these techniques, but reading and doing were different things. "Where would I get manure?" "I do not have any animals. Triple Bar has plenty to spare," James said. "I could talk to my boss, Mr. Blackwood. He is a fair man. Might let you have a few wagon loads for free, or for cheap anyway. We have to clear it out of the barns regular regardless." "Why would you help me?" Clara asked, studying his face in the fading light. "You do not know me." James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice had a different quality, something softer. "Because I know what it is like to want something so bad you are willing to break yourself trying to get it. And because I think this town could use some hope. It has been dying slow for years. Maybe someone crazy enough to plant seeds in dead ground is exactly what it needs." Clara felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of isolation she had been carrying. "I cannot pay much." "Did not ask you to pay," James said. "I will talk to Mr. Blackwood tomorrow. If he agrees, I will bring the first load out the day after. That suit you?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. James tipped his hat to her. You should get out of this sun, Miss Brennan. Early mornings and late evenings are the best times for this kind of work. Midday will kill you." He mounted his horse with that same easy grace and rode off, leaving Clara standing alone in her field of broken dreams and tentative hopes. That night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Clara thought about James Wilder's sea-colored eyes and the way he had looked at her land without judgment. She thought about his offer to help, given freely, and wondered what kind of man did such a thing for a stranger. Philadelphia had taught her to be suspicious of kindness, to look for the angle, the expectation of payment in one form or another. But there had been something in James's manner that seemed genuine, unguarded. She fell asleep with her hands throbbing and her back aching, but with something new stirring inside her. It was too fragile to call hope, too uncertain, but it was something. 2 days later, Clara was working in the early morning coolness when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the already bright sun, and saw James driving a heavily loaded wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. The wagon bed was piled high with dark, rich-looking manure. "Good morning," James called out as he pulled the horses to a stop. "Mr. Blackwood said you can have as much as you want. Told me to tell you he admires anyone willing to work this hard, and he would like to see something growing in redemption besides tumbleweeds and regret." Clara felt a smile break across her face, genuine and unguarded. "That is incredibly generous." "Please tell him I am very grateful." James jumped down from the wagon. "I will help you spread it. This much manure is not easy to move alone." "You do not have to do that," Clara protested. "You have already done so much." "I know I do not have to," James said, grabbing a pitchfork from the wagon bed, "but I am here and the work needs doing. Besides, I told Mr. Blackwood I would be gone most of the day. He is giving me the time." They worked together through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. James would fork the manure off the wagon, and Clara would spread it across the broken ground with her shovel. It was hard, dirty work, and the smell was pungent, but Clara found she did not mind. There was something satisfying about watching the dark, nutrient-rich material cover the pale, dead earth. As they worked, they talked. James told her about growing up in Kansas, about how his family's farm had been hit by locusts one year and they had lost everything. His father had died of a fever the following winter, and his mother had moved them to Texas, where she had a sister. James had been 15 then, and he had found work on the Triple Bar Ranch. He had been there for 14 years now, working his way up from a green ranch hand to one of Mr. Blackwood's most trusted men. "Do you ever think about having your own place?" Clara asked, pausing to catch her breath. James leaned on his pitchfork, looking out over the land. "Used to think about it all the time. But land is expensive, and I have been sending money back to help my mother and younger sister. Ma finally remarried a few years back. A good man who treats her right, so that is less of a worry now. But by the time I saved enough for a down payment, I realized I was not sure what I wanted anymore." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, and Clara thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I used to think I wanted the same thing my pa had. A farm, crops, a simple life. But after watching what that life did to him, watching him break himself trying to fight nature, I am not so sure anymore. Maybe I am just good at following someone else's plans instead of making my own." There was something in his voice that made Clara's heart ache. "You are here helping me," she said softly. "That is not following someone else's plan, that is choosing to do something kind." James looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the sun. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I just recognized something in you that I have been missing in myself." "What is that?" "Belief," he said simply. "You believe in what you are doing. I can see it in the way you move, the way you attack this ground like it is a personal challenge." "I have not believed in much for a long time." They held each other's gaze for a long moment before Clara looked away, unsettled by the intensity of what she had seen in his eyes. "We should keep working," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "This manure will not spread itself." By noon, they had emptied half the wagon and covered a significant portion of Clara's property. James insisted they stop for lunch, and he produced a cloth-wrapped package from the wagon. Inside were thick slices of bread, cheese, dried meat, and 2 apples. Mrs. Henshaw, the ranch cook, packed this for me this morning, he explained. She always gives me too much. Seems she thinks I am still a growing boy. They sat in the shade of the wagon, and Clara realized this was the first time she had shared a meal with anyone since arriving in Redemption. Mrs. Patterson provided breakfast and dinner at the boarding house, but Clara always ate alone in her room, too tired and too aware of being an outsider to join the other boarders. "Tell me about Philadelphia," James said as he cut slices of cheese with a pocket knife. "What made you leave?" Clara hesitated. She had not told anyone the real reason, had allowed people to assume she had come simply to claim her inheritance, but something about James invited confidence. "My father died 2 years ago," she began slowly. "He was a clerk at a shipping company. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable. After he died, my mother remarried within 6 months to a man named Gerald Thornton. He was a friend of my father's, or so we thought. He presented himself as someone who wanted to help us, to take care of us." She paused, staring down at her hands. "But after the wedding, he changed. Or maybe he had always been that way and we just had not seen it. He drank heavily. He was cruel to my mother, and he started looking at me in ways that made me frightened to be in the same room with him." James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "I tried to talk to my mother about it, but she would not listen. She was so desperate to maintain respectability to have a man to take care of us. When the letter came about Uncle Thomas's land, I saw it as a way out. My mother was furious. She said I was abandoning her, being selfish, but I could not stay there, I just could not." "That was brave," James said quietly. "Leaving everything you knew to come out here alone, or foolish," Clara said with a slight smile. "The verdict is still out." "Not foolish," James said firmly. "Brave. There is a difference between running away and running toward something. You are running toward a life you are building for yourself. That takes courage." Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "Thank you for saying that. Most days I feel like I am just barely holding on, like I am one disaster away from complete failure." "We are all one disaster away from failure," James said. "That is just life. The question is whether you get back up afterward." They finished their lunch and returned to work. By late afternoon, the wagon was empty, and a good portion of Clara's land was covered with a layer of dark manure. Clara's arms felt like rubber, and she was fairly certain she smelled worse than the manure itself, but she felt a fierce sense of accomplishment. "I will bring another load tomorrow," James said as he prepared to leave. "We need to cover all the ground you want to plant, and then we need to work it in deep." "I cannot ask you to give up so much of your time," Clara protested, though she desperately hoped he would ignore her. "You are not asking," James pointed out. "I am offering. There is a difference." He climbed onto the wagon seat and looked down at her. "Besides, I find I am enjoying myself. It has been a long time since I worked toward building something instead of just maintaining what already exists." Over the following week, James came every day. Sometimes he arrived early in the morning, sometimes in the late afternoon after completing his duties at the ranch. He brought load after load of manure, and together they spread it across the land. They worked the material into the soil, breaking up the hard pan, mixing and turning until Clara's arms burned and her back screamed. But the work was paying off. The earth was beginning to change. Instead of the pale, lifeless clay, the soil was becoming darker, richer. When Clara dug her fingers into it, it no longer felt like concrete but like something with substance, with potential. They talked endlessly as they worked. James told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in this harsh climate, about the cowboys he worked with and their various quirks and characters. He told her about spending weeks on the trail during cattle drives, sleeping under the stars, eating beans and hardtack, battling weather and rustlers and sheer boredom. Clara told him about Philadelphia, about the narrow streets crowded with people, the factory smoke that made the air taste metallic, the grand buildings and theaters she had only ever seen from the outside. She told him about her father, who had been gentle and kind and had taught her to read before she started school. She told him about the library where she had spent countless hours, escaping into books about far-off places and different lives. "You miss it?" James asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the small, dilapidated house on Clara's property. The house was barely livable, with a sagging roof and floors that creaked alarmingly, but it was hers. Clara planned to move out of the boarding house once she made some basic repairs. "I miss some things," Clara admitted. "I miss the library. I miss the theater, even though I only went a few times. I miss the sound of the city, strange as that sounds. There was always noise, always movement. Out here, the silence can be overwhelming." "I know what you mean," James said. "When I first came to Texas, the emptiness terrified me. Kansas had open spaces, but nothing like this. I felt like I could disappear out here and no one would ever know." "What changed?" He was quiet for a moment. "I guess I realized that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. You can be surrounded by people and feel isolated, or you can be in the middle of nowhere with just your horse and feel completely at peace. It depends on whether you are comfortable with yourself." "Are you?" Clara asked. "Comfortable with yourself," James smiled a little sadly. "Getting there." "Some days are better than others." He looked at her. "What about you?" Clara considered the question. "I used to think I knew who I was. I was the dutiful daughter, the one who did what was expected, who kept quiet and did not make trouble. But that version of myself felt like a costume I was wearing. Coming here, trying to make something grow in this dead ground, this feels more real. Even if I fail, even if nothing ever grows here, at least I will have tried. That matters to me." "It will grow," James said with quiet confidence. "You are doing everything right. It will just take time." By the end of the second week, they had covered all 6 acres that Clara wanted to plant. The earth had been transformed, no longer the pale, dead surface she had first encountered, but something dark and rich with promise. Now came the next phase. "We need to plant the green manure," James explained. "Beans and clover. We will let them grow for about 6 weeks and then we will turn them back into the soil. That will add nitrogen and more organic matter. After that, the ground should be ready for your food crops." Clara had been studying her seeds each night, planning what she would plant and where. She had varieties that she hoped would thrive in this climate with careful management. But James was right. The soil needed more preparation. They planted together, James showing Clara how to space the seeds, how deep to plant them. It felt strange to put seeds into the ground knowing they would be turned under before they could be harvested, but Clara understood the logic. These plants would be a sacrifice, feeding the earth so that future crops could thrive. After the planting was done, they installed a basic irrigation system. There was a well on the property, and while the water table was deep, it was reliable. James helped Clara rig up a series of channels and gates that would allow her to water the plants efficiently without wasting precious water. "This will work for now," James said, surveying their handiwork. "But eventually you might want to think about something more permanent. Windmill, maybe, to pump water up into a tank. That way you would have pressure and could reach more of the land." "One step at a time," Clara said, though she was already imagining what he described. "I need to see if anything will actually grow first." They did not have to wait long. Within days, tiny green shoots began to emerge from the dark soil. Clara checked on them obsessively, walking the rows each morning and evening, watching in wonder as life appeared where there had been only death. The beans pushed through the earth with determination, unfurling their first leaves toward the sun. The clover spread like a green carpet, delicate but persistent. James came by less frequently now that the initial heavy work was done, but he still visited several times a week. Clara found herself listening for the sound of his horse, found her heart lifting when she saw him riding across the prairie toward her land. They had fallen into an easy friendship, one that felt natural and unforced. But there was something else beneath the friendship, something neither of them had acknowledged. Clara caught herself watching the way James moved, efficient and graceful despite his size. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep timbre of his voice when he was relaxed and happy. She thought about him at night, lying in her bed at the boarding house, remembering things he had said, the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. It frightened her, these feelings. She had come to Redemption to build a new life for herself, to prove she could be independent and self-sufficient. The last thing she needed was to complicate everything by developing feelings for a cowboy who would probably move on to the next ranch eventually, following the work and the wages. But the heart, Clara was learning, did not much care about practicality. One evening, about 3 weeks after the green manure had been planted, James arrived just as the sun was setting. Clara had been working on the house, trying to patch the worst holes in the roof before the summer storms arrived. She was filthy, her dress torn in one place, her hair falling out of its bun. "You are going to break your neck up there," James called from below. Clara looked down to see him standing in her yard, hands on his hips, looking up at her with an expression that was equal parts amused and concerned. "I am being careful," she assured him. "That is what everyone says right before they fall," James replied. "Come down from there, I will help you with the roof this weekend. We can do it properly with 2 people and the right tools." Clara wanted to argue, to insist she could handle it herself, but the truth was she had been fighting with a particularly stubborn section for over an hour and was close to tears of frustration. She climbed down carefully and jumped the last few feet to the ground. "Thank you," she said, brushing dust and wood splinters from her skirt. "I have been trying to do everything myself, but I am beginning to realize that some jobs really do require help." "There is no shame in accepting help," James said. "Nobody builds anything worthwhile completely alone." They walked together toward the field where the green manure was growing thick and lush. It was like a miracle, all that green against the faded gold of the surrounding prairie. Clara never got tired of looking at it. "It is working," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I did not really believe it would, but it is actually working." "You did this," James said. "You and your stubborn refusal to accept that something was impossible," Clara shook her head. "We did this. I could never have managed it without you. I just helped with the heavy lifting." The vision was all yours. They stood together in the fading light, and Clara became acutely aware of how close James was standing, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her breath caught in her throat. "Clara," James said, his voice lower than usual. He rarely used her first name. "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw something that made her knees feel weak. "I have been coming here every day, helping with this land, and I have been telling myself it was just because I wanted to see something grow in Redemption again. But that is not the whole truth." He took a breath. "The truth is, I come here to see you. I wake up thinking about you. I go to sleep thinking about you. When I am working cattle or mending fence, part of my mind is always here, wondering what you are doing, hoping you are safe." Clara could not breathe. "James, Wait, let me finish," he said. "I know you came here to build a life for yourself, to be independent. I know you do not need a man complicating things, but I cannot keep pretending that I see you as just a friend because you are so much more than that to me. You are the bravest person I have ever met. You are smart and funny and beautiful, and watching you fight for this land has reminded me what it feels like to believe in something." Tears were streaming down Clara's face, though she was not entirely sure why she was crying. "I am terrified," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of this. Of feeling this way. The last man in my life who was supposed to care for me hurt me and frightened me. I came here to get away from all that, to prove I could take care of myself. I do not know how to trust someone with my heart." James reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not move, he gently cupped her face, his calloused thumb brushing away her tears. "I am not going to hurt you, Clara. I cannot promise that life will not hurt you because that is beyond my control. But I can promise that I will always be honest with you. I will always respect you. and I will never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are." "How can you be sure?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. "Because I have watched you turn dead ground into living soil," James said. "I have seen you work until your hands bled and then get up the next day and work some more. You are a force of nature, Clara Brennan, and I would be a fool to ever try to diminish that. I do not want to own you or control you. I just want to be part of your life, if you will have me." Clara looked up into his sea-colored eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope, and something that looked very much like love. She thought about the past months, about the way James had shown up day after day to help her with her impossible dream. She thought about how he had never condescended to her, never made her feel small or foolish. He had treated her as an equal, as a partner. "I am falling in love with you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself it was just gratitude or loneliness, but it is not. It is real and it is terrifying." A slow smile spread across James's face, transforming it. "That is just about the best thing anyone has ever said to me, even though I am terrified. Especially because you are terrified, it means it matters. It means you are not taking it lightly." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "Can I kiss you, Clara?" she nodded, not trusting her voice, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning. Clara kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, holding him close. The kiss deepened, and Clara felt something inside her that had been locked tight for so long finally break open. This was nothing like the unwanted attention from her stepfather, the grabbing hands and leering eyes. This was a choice freely made, and it was wonderful when they finally broke apart. Both of them were breathing hard. James rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks." "So have I," Clara admitted. "I just did not know if you felt the same way." "I do. I absolutely do." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "So what happens now?" Clara laughed, a little giddy. "I have no idea. I have never done this before. I mean, I have been courted, technically, but it was always so formal and prescribed. This feels different." "It is different," James agreed. "How about we just figure it out as we go? No pressure, no expectations beyond being honest with each other." "I would like that," Clara said. They stood together in the twilight, wrapped in each other's arms, while around them the green shoots of the cover crop whispered in the evening breeze. It felt like the world had shifted on its axis, like everything had suddenly become more vivid, more real. Over the following weeks, Clara and James's relationship deepened. He continued to help her with the land and the house. They patched the roof together, with James doing the more dangerous work while Clara assisted from below, handing up tools and materials. They reinforced the sagging porch and replaced broken windows. Slowly, the house began to look less like it was on the verge of collapse and more like a real home. The green manure grew thick and lush, and when the time came, they cut it down and turned it back into the soil. It was hard work, plowing under all those thriving plants, but Clara understood the necessity. These plants were not the end goal but a means to it. After the green manure was incorporated, they let the soil rest for 2 weeks. Then came the moment Clara had been waiting for since she first arrived in Redemption. It was time to plant her food crops. She laid out her plans carefully. Corn in the back, where the tall stalks would not shade the other plants. Beans planted among the corn, where they could climb the stalks. Squash in the front, where their broad leaves would help shade the soil and retain moisture. Tomatoes, peppers, and herbs in a smaller plot near the house. She had seeds for melons and cucumbers, for carrots and onions, for everything she had dreamed of growing. James helped her plant everything, and this time when the seeds went into the ground, they would be allowed to grow to fruition. It felt momentous, sacred almost. Clara said a small prayer over each row, hoping against hope that her work would be rewarded, and then they waited. Clara checked the fields multiple times each day, watching for the first signs of germination. James teased her gently about it. "You know, checking every hour will not make them grow faster." "I know," Clara said, "but I cannot help myself. What if something goes wrong? What if I did all this work and nothing grows?" Then we will figure out why and try again, James said, pulling her into his arms. They were standing in the field in the early morning light, the air still cool and sweet. But I do not think that is going to happen. Look at this soil. It is alive now. You brought it back to life. He was right. When Clara knelt and ran her fingers through the earth, it was completely different from the hard, dead clay she had first encountered. It was soft and dark, with a rich, loamy smell. It held together when she squeezed it, but crumbled easily. It was perfect. The first sprouts appeared within a week. Clara saw them one morning, tiny green threads pushing through the soil, and she actually shouted with joy. She ran to town to tell James, finding him at the general store where he had stopped to pick up supplies for the ranch. "They are growing," she exclaimed, not caring that she was making a scene in front of the Johnsons and several other townspeople. "The seeds are sprouting." James's face lit up with a grin. "I told you they would. I know, but seeing it is different from believing it." Clara felt like she could float. "You have to come see. Can you come this evening?" "I will be there," James promised. As Clara left the store, she heard Mrs. Johnson say to her husband, "Well, I will be. She actually got something to grow." Word spread quickly through Redemption. Over the next few days, several people made excuses to ride past Clara's property, and she saw them staring at the rows of green shoots emerging from ground that had been written off as useless. Some looked surprised, some skeptical, as if they were waiting for the plants to die. But a few looked hopeful, as if Clara's success had awakened something in them. Mr. Henderson, the old man who had first told Clara she was wasting her time, rode up one afternoon while Clara was watering. He sat on his horse for a long time, just looking at the plants. "Heard you got things growing," he finally said. "Yes, sir," Clara replied, trying to keep the satisfaction out of her voice. "Ground has been dead for 5 years," he said, as if she did not know. "We all tried everything we could think of, nothing worked." "Sometimes you have to rebuild from the foundation up," Clara said. "The soil needed to be healed before anything could grow in it." Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "My wife used to say something similar. She said you could not grow a garden in a neglected heart. I always thought she was being poetic, but maybe she meant it more literal than I understood." He looked at Clara. "I owe you an apology. I should not have discouraged you." "You were trying to protect me from disappointment," Clara said generously. "I understand that. Still, you have done something remarkable here. Thomas would be pleased, I think. He loved this land even when it broke his heart." After he rode away, Clara stood in her field feeling a complex mix of emotions. She had proven the doubters wrong, which felt good. But she also understood the pain that underlay their skepticism. These were people who had fought their own battles with this land and lost. Seeing her succeed might be inspiring to some, but to others it might feel like salt in old wounds. That evening, James arrived to find Clara sitting on her porch steps, looking pensive. "What is wrong?" he asked, settling beside her. "Nothing is wrong exactly. I have just been thinking." She leaned against his shoulder, taking comfort in his solid presence. "Mr. Henderson came by today. He apologized for telling me I was wasting my time. It made me realize that my success might be difficult for some people in town. They tried so hard and lost so much." "That is not your fault," James said firmly, "and anyone who begrudges you success is not worth worrying about." "I know. But I also know what it is like to feel like you have failed at something important. I do not want to be insensitive." James was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think? I think you should share what you have learned. Once your crops come in, once you have proven that this method works, you could teach others. Help them rebuild their own land." Clara sat up straighter. "Do you think anyone would want to learn from me? I am still an outsider here." "You are less of an outsider every day," James pointed out. "And yes, I think some people would be very interested. Not everyone, maybe. Some folks are too proud or too stuck in their ways, but there will be others who see what you have done and want that hope for themselves." The idea took root in Clara's mind. She had come to Redemption thinking only of her own survival, her own need to build a new life. But what if she could help rebuild the whole community? What if her little patch of resurrected land could be the beginning of something larger? As the weeks passed, Clara's crops grew stronger and more robust. The corn stalks shot up, thick and green. The beans twined around them, producing white flowers that would become pods. The squash plants spread their broad leaves, and Clara could see tiny squashes forming. The tomato plants in her kitchen garden grew heavy with fruit, green orbs that would slowly ripen to red. James spent more and more time at Clara's property. He brought his bedroll and started sleeping in the barn, which Clara had cleaned out and repaired. It was not proper, according to the standards she had been raised with, but Clara found she did not care much about propriety anymore. They were not doing anything wrong. James was simply there helping her, and their relationship was their own business. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit together on the porch and talk. Sometimes James would play a harmonica he carried, filling the air with sweet, melancholy melodies. Clara would lean against him and watch the stars emerge one by one in the vast Texas sky. "I want to ask you something," James said one night. His voice was serious enough that Clara sat up to look at him properly. "What is it?" "Move in with me," he said, then immediately corrected himself. "I mean, I want to move in with you, here, permanently." Clara's heart began to race. "James, that is—" "I know it is not conventional," he interrupted. "I know we are not married and people will talk, but I love you, Clara. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to help you build this farm. I want to be your partner in all things." "I love you too," Clara said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But I need you to understand something. I need to know that you see me as an equal partner, that this is my land, my project, and you are joining me in it, not taking it over." "Of course," James said immediately. "Clara, I would never presume to take over what you have built. I have the utmost respect for what you are doing here. I just want to be part of it, with you." "Then yes," Clara said, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I want you to move in. I want us to build this life together." James pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. When they broke apart, he was smiling. "I should probably mention that Mr. Blackwood knows about us. He asked me the other day if I was planning to leave the ranch." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that I have fallen in love with a remarkable woman who is farming the old Brennan property and that I want to be with her. I offered to stay on part-time if he needed me, but I understand if he wants someone who can be there full-time." "What did he say?" "He said he had wondered when I would finally figure out what I wanted, and he said he would be happy to have me part-time until he can find someone to replace me. He is a good man." Clara felt a wave of relief. She had worried that James might come to resent giving up his position at the ranch for her, but it seemed he had made his choice with his eyes open. "I do not have much money," Clara said. "We will be living frugally until the crops come in and I can sell the produce." "I have some saved," James said. "Not a lot, but enough to see us through. And I can pick up work around town if we need extra. It will be fine, Clara. We will make it work." Over the next weeks, James moved his few possessions into Clara's house. It was not much: a trunk of clothes, his saddle and tack, a few books, his harmonica, and a rifle. But his presence transformed the house into a home. They fell into domestic rhythms, cooking together, eating meals on the porch in the evenings, working side by side during the day. The people of Redemption certainly noticed. Clara could feel their eyes on her when she went to town, could hear the whispers, but she also found unexpected allies. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner, stopped her on the street one day. "I hear you and that cowboy are living together," she said bluntly. Clara lifted her chin, prepared for censure. "Yes, ma'am, we are," Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Good for you. Life is too short and too hard out here to worry too much about what people think. If you have found someone who makes you happy and treats you well, hold on to him." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes. "Thank you, that means more than you know." "Just remember," Mrs. Patterson added, "if he ever does not treat you well, you come tell me. I have a shotgun and I am not afraid to use it." Clara laughed through her tears. "I will keep that in mind." As summer deepened, the crops flourished. The corn grew tall, the stalks rustling in the hot breeze. The beans produced prolifically. The squash vines sprawled across the ground, heavy with fruit. Clara's kitchen garden overflowed with tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and herbs. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. She and James worked from dawn until dusk, watering, weeding, and tending the plants. It was exhausting work, but it was also deeply satisfying. Clara had never felt more connected to the earth, more aware of the rhythms of nature. She understood now why people fell in love with farming despite its challenges. There was something profound about putting a seed in the ground and watching it transform into food. One evening in late July, Clara stood in the middle of her cornfield, surrounded by stalks that towered over her head. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She could hear James working in the barn, settling his horse for the night. A sense of peace settled over her, deep and complete. This was home. This was the life she had dreamed of. Not just the land and the crops, but the partnership she had found with James, the sense of purpose and accomplishment, the feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Clara. James called from the barn. "Come here, you need to see this." Clara made her way through the corn rows and found James standing in the barn doorway, grinning. "What is it?" "Look," he said, pointing to the far corner of the barn. Clara looked and gasped with delight. There, curled up in a nest of straw, was a barn cat she had seen around the property occasionally. But the cat was not alone. Nestled against her were 4 tiny kittens, their eyes still closed. "She decided this was a safe place to have her babies," James said softly. "I think that is a good sign." Clara felt tears welling up again. She seemed to cry at everything these days, but they were happy tears. "We should put out food and water for her." "Already done," James said. "I set up a spot in the tack room where she can eat without worrying about other animals getting to it." Clara turned to him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "How did I get so lucky?" "I am the lucky one," James replied, pulling her close. "You took a chance on me, on us." "It was not a chance," Clara said. "It was a certainty. From the moment you offered to help me with the manure, I think I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were different. That you saw me, the real me, and you were not scared of what you saw." James kissed her forehead. "There is nothing about you that scares me. You amaze me every single day." They stood together in the barn doorway as darkness fell, listening to the sounds of the farm settling for the night. The mother cat purred softly to her kittens. James's horse munched hay in his stall. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. It was a symphony of life, and Clara was part of it. As August arrived, the crops began to mature. The corn was nearly ready for harvest. The beans had been producing for weeks, and Clara had been drying them for storage. The squash was abundant, more than they could possibly eat themselves. Clara knew it was time to think about selling the surplus. She and James loaded up a wagon with produce and drove into Redemption. Clara was nervous. She had no idea if anyone would actually buy what she was selling. But when they set up their wagon on Main Street, a small crowd gathered almost immediately. "Are these from the Brennan property?" Mrs. Johnson asked, examining a squash with interest. "Yes, ma'am," Clara replied. "All grown in the ground everyone said was dead. How much?" Asked a rancher Clara recognized from the saloon. Clara named a price that was fair but not low. She had worked too hard to undervalue her produce. The rancher nodded and bought 2 squash and several pounds of beans. Mrs. Johnson took tomatoes and peppers. More people came, drawn by curiosity as much as a desire for fresh vegetables. By noon, Clara had sold more than half of what she had brought, and she had a nice sum of money in her pocket. "This is amazing," she whispered to James as they loaded the remaining produce back into the wagon. "This is just the beginning," James replied. "Wait until harvest time. You are going to have more corn than you know what to do with." But before they could leave town, Mr. Henderson approached them. With him were 2 other farmers, men Clara had seen around but never spoken to. "Miss Brennan," Mr. Henderson said, "these are my neighbors, Mr. Ross and Mr. Garrett. We have been watching what you have done with your land. We were wondering if you might be willing to share your methods." Clara looked at the three men, seeing the hope and humility in their faces. These were proud men, hardened by years of failure, and they were asking for help. "Of course," Clara said. "I would be happy to share everything I have learned. Why don't you come by the property tomorrow afternoon? I can show you the soil, explain what we did." The relief on their faces was palpable. "We would appreciate that," Mr. Ross said. "We have been thinking about giving up, selling out, and moving on, but if there is a chance we can make our land productive again." "There is always a chance," Clara said firmly. "It takes work and patience, but it can be done." The next day, the three farmers arrived at Clara's property. James had taken on the role of assistant teacher, helping Clara demonstrate their techniques. They walked the men through the fields, showing them the healthy crops, explaining how they had rebuilt the soil with manure and green manure, how they had installed the irrigation system. "The key is understanding that soil is alive," Clara explained. "When it is damaged, you cannot just throw seeds at it and hope. You have to heal it first, feed it, bring it back to life, then it can support plants." Mr. Garrett knelt and ran his hand through the dark soil. "I remember when my land looked like this, before the drought, before the dust storms. I had almost forgotten." "You can have it again," Clara said. "It will take time and effort, but you can rebuild." Over the following weeks, Clara and James became informal agricultural advisors to several families in the area. Clara had worried that the men might resent taking advice from a woman, but if they did, they kept it to themselves. The proof was in her fields, and that spoke louder than any prejudices. She showed them where to source manure, how to work it into the soil, how to plant and turn under green manure. She shared her seeds, selling some and giving away others to those who could not afford to pay. She taught them about crop rotation, about companion planting, about water conservation. It was exhausting work on top of managing her own farm, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Clara realized that this was part of what she had been searching for when she left Philadelphia. She wanted to matter. She wanted her life to mean something. Helping to bring life back to redemption felt significant in a way that nothing she had done before ever had. In late August, they harvested the corn. It was back-breaking work, stripping the ears from the stalks, husking them, sorting them. Clara's hands were raw and her back ached, but when she looked at the mountain of golden corn they had produced, she felt a fierce pride. "We did it," she said to James as they stood surveying their harvest. "We actually did it." "You did it," James corrected. "This was your dream, your vision, I just helped." "No," Clara said firmly. "We did this together. I could never have managed it alone." James pulled her into his arms, not caring that they were both filthy and covered in corn silk. "Then we make a good team." "The best team," Clara agreed. They sold most of the corn, keeping enough for their own needs and for seed for next year. The money they made was not a fortune, but it was enough to live on comfortably and to invest in improvements for the farm. Clara wanted to build a proper chicken coop and get some hens. James wanted to buy a few pigs. They talked about getting a milk cow, maybe some goats. "We are farmers," Clara said one evening, a note of wonder in her voice. "Actual farmers. I came here with nothing but hope and a bag of seeds, and now we are farmers." "We are going to need help next year," James said. "This is too much work for just two people, especially if we expand like we are planning," Clara nodded. "I have been thinking about that. Maybe we could hire someone local, give work to someone who needs it." As autumn arrived, the landscape began to change. The brutal heat of summer eased into warm days and cool nights. Clara's fields turned golden as the plants completed their life cycles. They harvested the last of the squash and beans, pulled up the spent plants, and began preparing the soil for a winter cover crop. Other farms around Redemption were also showing signs of recovery. The families Clara had taught were seeing results from their efforts. It would be another year before they had full harvests, but the land was responding, greening up, showing life. The town itself seemed to be waking from a long sleep. New families were moving in, drawn by word that the land was productive again. The empty buildings on Main Street were being occupied. There was talk of opening a new school. One evening in October, as Clara and James sat on their porch watching the sunset, James said, "Marry me." Clara's heart stopped. "What? Marry me?" James repeated, turning to face her. "I know we are already living as partners. I know you do not need a piece of paper to prove our commitment. But I want the world to know that you are mine and I am yours. I want to stand in front of everyone and promise to love you and support you and be your partner for the rest of my life." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." James pulled a ring from his pocket. It was simple, a silver band with a small blue stone. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother sent it to me last month. She said she always knew I would find someone worth giving it to." Clara held out her hand, trembling, and James slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I love you," Clara said. "I love you so much." "I love you too," James replied. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They were married on a cool November afternoon in the little church at the end of town. The circuit preacher was making his monthly visit, and he seemed delighted to perform a wedding. Clara wore a simple dress of soft blue cotton that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make. James wore his best shirt and trousers, his dark hair slicked back, his face shining with happiness. The church was more crowded than Clara had expected. Mrs. Patterson was there, and the Johnsons and Mr. Henderson with his wife. Mr. Blackwood had come from the ranch, along with several of the cowboys who worked there. The farmers Clara had taught attended with their families. Even some people Clara had never formally met showed up, apparently wanting to be part of the celebration. As Clara walked down the short aisle, her eyes locked with James's, and everything else faded away. This man had seen her at her most desperate and vulnerable, had helped her transform an impossible dream into reality, had loved her without trying to change her or diminish her. She was about to promise him her life, and it was the easiest promise she would ever make. The ceremony was brief. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love and honor and support each other. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Clara with a tenderness that made her knees weak. The small congregation erupted in applause. Afterward, there was a gathering at the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson had organized it, and several women in town had contributed food. There was music and dancing and laughter. Clara danced with James, with Mr. Blackwood, with Mr. Henderson. She talked to more people in one afternoon than she had in all the months since arriving in Redemption. As the sun set and people began to leave, Mrs. Johnson pulled Clara aside. "You have done something remarkable here," she said. "Not just with the farm, though that is impressive enough. You have given people hope. You have shown us that dead things can come back to life. That matters more than you know." Clara hugged the older woman, overcome with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for accepting me, for supporting me." "Thank you for not giving up," Mrs. Johnson replied. That night, Clara and James returned to their farm, to their home. They lay in their bed, holding each other, and Clara thought about how far she had come. A year ago, she had been trapped in a life that was slowly destroying her. Now she was free, she was happy. She was building something meaningful with a man she loved more than she had known it was possible to love. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, running his fingers through her hair. "How grateful I am," Clara said, "for all of it, the hard parts and the good parts. It all led me here to you, to this life." "I am grateful too," James said. "You saved me, you know. I was drifting, going through the motions. You reminded me what it feels like to have purpose." They made love slowly, tenderly, celebrating their union and their love. Afterward, they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, safe and content. Winter came, mild by Eastern standards but cold enough by Texas reckoning. Clara and James spent the short days working on projects around the farm. They built the chicken coop and acquired 6 laying hens. They purchased 2 young pigs and constructed a pen for them. They made repairs to the barn and house, winterizing as best they could. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and made plans for the spring. Clara pored over seed catalogs, deciding what new varieties to try. James sketched out designs for expanding the irrigation system. They talked about the future, about the children they hoped to have someday, about growing old together on this land they had brought back to life. Clara also spent time writing. She had begun documenting her agricultural methods, thinking she might put together a pamphlet that could help other farmers. She wrote about soil restoration, about water conservation, about adapting farming techniques to harsh climates. James encouraged her, reading her drafts and offering suggestions. "You should try to get this published," he said one evening. "Send it to one of those agricultural journals you used to read in Philadelphia. Do you think anyone would be interested?" "I think a lot of people would be very interested. What you have done here is not just lucky accident, it is a replicable method. Other people in other places could use this information." Clara felt a flutter of excitement. The idea of her work reaching beyond redemption, possibly helping farmers across the West, was thrilling. Christmas came, and Clara and James celebrated quietly, just the two of them. They exchanged small gifts. Clara gave James a new harmonica, better quality than his old battered one. James gave Clara a set of fine gardening tools he had ordered from a catalog. They cooked a modest feast and ate by candlelight, toasting their first Christmas as husband and wife. As the year turned to 1884, Clara reflected on all that had changed. 14 months ago, she had arrived in redemption alone, frightened, carrying little more than hope. Now she had a home, a husband, a thriving farm, and a place in the community. It seemed almost miraculous. The winter cover crops she had planted were growing well, adding more nutrients to the soil. By spring, the earth would be even richer, even more productive. Clara had ambitious plans for the growing season. She wanted to double their planted acreage. She wanted to try some new crops, maybe wheat or sorghum. She wanted to build a root cellar for storing produce through the hot months. In February, Clara realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month, afraid to hope, but when she missed again, she knew. She was pregnant. She told James one evening after supper. She had been nervous about how he would react, worried that a baby might not fit into their plans, but his face transformed with joy. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Clara confirmed, laughing at his expression. "You are going to be a father." James picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "This is the best news," he said when he finally set her down. "The absolute best news. You are not worried." "About the timing, about the added expense?" "Worried, Clara, this is everything I have ever wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You have given me all of that." Clara felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I am scared," she admitted. "What if I am not a good mother? What if something goes wrong?" "You are going to be an amazing mother," James said firmly. "Look at what you have done with this land. You took something dead and brought it to life. You will do the same with our child, pouring love and care into them, and nothing is going to go wrong." "I will make sure of it." As spring arrived, Clara's belly began to swell with new life even as the land around her burst into bloom. She and James planted their expanded fields, working carefully so Clara did not overexert herself. The other farmers in the area helped out, repaying Clara for all the assistance she had given them. It was a community effort, everyone working together to ensure the success of the farm that had sparked Redemption's rebirth. The crops that year grew even better than the previous summer. The soil, now fully restored, was rich and dark and full of life. Everything they planted seemed to thrive. The corn grew tall and strong. The beans produced abundantly. New crops like tomatoes and melons flourished. Clara's kitchen garden was a riot of color and life. As her pregnancy advanced, Clara had to step back from the heaviest physical work, but she directed operations, planned the planting schedules, managed the sales of their produce. James hired 2 local young men to help with the farm work, brothers named Tom and Eddie who worked hard and learned quickly. In August, Clara's agricultural pamphlet was accepted for publication by a Texas farming journal. She received a small payment and copies of the issue featuring her article. Seeing her words in print, knowing that her methods would reach farmers across the state filled her with pride. She had contributed something meaningful, something that would last beyond her own lifetime. The baby came in October, during the harvest season. Clara's labor was long and difficult, but Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Johnson attended her, experienced women who knew how to handle childbirth. James paced outside the bedroom, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards. When the baby finally arrived, Clara heard a cry that seemed to pierce straight through to her soul. "It is a boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, placing the tiny, squalling infant on Clara's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Clara looked down at her son, at his red, wrinkled face and tiny, waving fists, and felt a love so overwhelming it was almost frightening. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." James was allowed in then, and he approached the bed with something like awe on his face. "Can I hold him?" Clara carefully transferred the baby to James's arms. The contrast was almost comical, this tiny infant cradled in the arms of the big, strong cowboy. But James held his son with infinite tenderness, his expression full of wonder. "He is perfect," James said, his voice choked with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Clara's uncle whose death had brought her to Texas and made all of this possible. Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong. He nursed well and grew quickly. Clara and James took turns walking him when he was fussy, singing to him, marveling at every tiny change and development. The farm continued to thrive. With the help of Tom and Eddie, they brought in a record harvest. They had more produce than they could sell locally, so James arranged to transport some of it to larger towns, expanding their market. The money they made was reinvested in the farm. They bought more chickens, added a milk cow, planted fruit trees that would take years to mature but would eventually provide another source of income. Other farms around Redemption were also doing well. The town itself was transforming. New businesses opened. A proper school was established. Families who had left during the drought years began to return. There was talk of bringing a railroad spur to Redemption, connecting the town more firmly to the wider world. Clara watched these changes with satisfaction. She had not set out to save a town, only to save herself. But in fighting for her own survival and success, she had sparked something larger. She had proven that recovery was possible, that dead ground could live again. As winter settled in again, Clara sat by the fire with baby Thomas in her arms while James read aloud from a book. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but inside their sturdy house, all was warm and peaceful. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the fear and struggle and doubt. She thought about the moment she had first driven her shovel into the dead earth, refusing to accept that nothing could grow. She thought about James riding up that day, offering help when she had expected judgment. She thought about the first green shoots pushing through the soil, about the way the land had responded to care and patience. She thought about standing in her cornfield at sunset, surrounded by abundance, knowing she had done something impossible. And now she had this, a husband she loved, a child she adored, a home that was truly hers, a community that valued her. The seeds she had planted had grown into something far more significant than she had ever imagined. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, setting down his book. "Everything," Clara said. "How far we have come, how different my life is from what I thought it would be." "Better or worse?" "So much better," Clara said without hesitation. "I never imagined I could be this happy." James came to sit beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and looking down at their sleeping son. "I never imagined I could have all this. A real home, a family, work that matters. You gave me that, Clara." "We gave it to each other," Clara corrected. "I brought the dream, but you helped make it real. We are partners in this." "Partners," James agreed, kissing her temple. "In everything, the years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts, though never as severe as the one that had nearly killed Redemption. There were years when crops failed despite their best efforts, when insects or disease decimated plants. There were financial struggles and disagreements and moments of doubt, but Clara and James faced everything together. They learned and adapted, constantly improving their methods. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Grace born 2 years after Thomas, and another son named William who arrived 3 years after that. The children grew up running through the fields, learning to work the land almost as soon as they could walk. Clara continued to write, publishing more articles about sustainable farming techniques. She became something of an expert, consulted by farmers from across the region. James expanded their operations, eventually purchasing more land adjacent to their original property. They built a larger house with enough room for their growing family and for the hands they employed. The farm became one of the most productive in the area. But more than that, it became a symbol of hope and perseverance. People pointed to it as proof that with enough determination and ingenuity, anything was possible. Tom and Eddie, the young men who had started as hired hands, eventually became partners in the farming operation. Both of them married local girls and built houses on the property. The farm became more of a cooperative enterprise with everyone working together for mutual success. Redemption itself flourished. By 1890, it was a thriving town with a population of over 1,000. The railroad spur had been built, connecting them to major markets. New industries had sprung up, including a cannery that processed produce from local farms. The school had expanded, and there was even talk of establishing a small college focused on agriculture. Clara often thought about the day she had arrived in Redemption, alone and frightened, facing ground that everyone said was dead. She remembered the sound of her shovel hitting that hard earth, remembered the way her hands had blistered, remembered the doubt that had whispered she was wasting her time. She remembered James riding up that first evening, offering help without judgment. She remembered the first green shoots, the first harvest, the first moment she had realized that her impossible dream was becoming reality. Now, sitting on the porch of her comfortable home, surrounded by fields of waving grain, watching her children play in the yard, she understood that she had planted more than seeds all those years ago. She had planted hope. And from that hope had grown a life richer and more fulfilling than she had ever imagined possible. James came out of the house and settled into the chair beside her, reaching over to take her hand. His hair was starting to gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to Clara he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, a familiar question after all these years. "How grateful I am," Clara said, "for all of it. The struggles and the successes, for you, for our family, for this life we built together." "I am grateful too," James said, squeezing her hand. "Every single day." Young Thomas ran up to the porch, now a sturdy boy of 7 with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. "Mother, father, come see. The corn in the south field is already knee-high and we only planted it 3 weeks ago." Clara and James exchanged a smile. "Let us go see," Clara said, rising from her chair. They walked hand in hand through their farm, their children running ahead of them, excitedly pointing out all the growing things. The soil beneath Clara's feet was rich and dark, alive with earthworms and microorganisms, capable of supporting abundant life. It bore no resemblance to the dead, cracked earth she had first encountered. She had done this. She and James together with help from their community, but it had started with her refusal to accept that nothing could grow. She had believed in possibility when everyone else had accepted impossibility. She had worked until her hands bled and her back screamed because she could see in her mind what this land could become, and it had become more than she had dreamed. Not just a successful farm, but a home filled with love, a community brought back to life, a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. As the sun set over the fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara leaned against James and watched their children play. She thought about the seeds she had brought with her from Philadelphia, carefully saved and precious. She thought about planting them in ground everyone said was dead, about the cowboy who had helped her without asking for anything in return, about watching those seeds grow into something beautiful and sustaining. She thought about how she had grown too, from a frightened girl running from an unbearable situation into a woman who knew her own strength, who had built a life on her own terms, who had found love and purpose and belonging. "I would not change a thing," she said quietly. "Not even the hard parts?" James asked. "Not even those," Clara confirmed. "The hard parts made the good parts possible. The struggle made the success meaningful." James pulled her closer. "I love you, Clara Wilder. I loved you from the moment I saw you attacking that dead ground with your shovel, too stubborn to quit even though everyone had given up." "I love you too," Clara said. "Thank you for seeing me, for helping me, for believing in me when I was not sure I believed in myself." "You always believed," James said. "That was what drew me to you. Your unshakable faith that impossible things could become possible." As darkness fell, they gathered their children and headed back to the house. The lamps were lit, casting warm golden light through the windows. Inside, dinner was waiting, prepared by Grace under Clara's instruction. The family gathered around the table, holding hands while James said grace. Clara looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, her husband, her partner in all things. Her children, healthy and happy and full of potential. This was what she had been planting seeds toward all along, though she had not known it at the time, not just crops but a life, a family, a future. After dinner, while James helped the children prepare for bed, Clara stepped outside one last time. She walked to the edge of the fields and knelt down, running her hands through the soil. It was cool now, damp with evening dew, rich and full of life. "Thank you," she whispered to the earth. "Thank you for responding to care. Thank you for proving that dead things can come back to life." She stood and looked up at the stars scattered across the vast Texas sky. Somewhere in Philadelphia, her mother was living her life with the man Clara had fled from. Clara hoped her mother had found some happiness, though she doubted it. She had long since forgiven her mother for choosing security over protection. People made the choices they thought they had to make to survive. Clara had made different choices. She had chosen freedom over security, possibility over certainty, love over loneliness. She had chosen to plant seeds in dead ground because she refused to believe that death was permanent. She had chosen to trust a cowboy who offered help freely. She had chosen to build a life rather than simply endure one. And her choices had led her here, to this moment, standing on her own land under an endless sky, surrounded by the evidence of what could be accomplished through faith and hard work and love. James came out to join her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Children are in bed. Thomas wanted one more story, but I told him tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Clara agreed. "There will always be tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. We have time." They stood together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the night. Crickets chirped in the grass. An owl hooted from the barn. In the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song. These were the sounds of life, of a world that continued to turn, of cycles of death and rebirth that had been playing out since the beginning of time. Clara had tapped into something ancient when she began working this soil. She had connected with the fundamental truth that life wants to persist, wants to grow, wants to thrive. All it needs is someone willing to create the conditions for growth, to nurture and protect and believe. She had been that someone for this land. James had been that someone for her. Together, they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would farm this land, and their children's children. The methods Clara had developed would be passed down and refined. The community they had helped rebuild would continue to grow and flourish. This was legacy. This was meaning. This was what it meant to live a life that mattered. "Ready to go in?" James asked. Clara took one last look at the fields stretching out before her, at the solid house with light glowing from its windows, at the barn and outbuildings, at everything they had built together. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." They walked hand in hand back to the house, back to their children and their life together. Behind them, the fields lay quiet in the darkness, but even in the night the plants were growing, reaching toward the sun that would rise again in the morning. The cycle continued, eternal and unstoppable. Clara had planted seeds in ground everyone said was dead. A cowboy had helped her, and together they had watched them grow. But they had grown more than crops. They had grown a love that would last a lifetime. They had grown a family. They had grown a community. They had grown hope in a place where hope had died. And in the end, that was the greatest harvest of all. Not the corn or the beans or the squash, but the proof that with enough faith and effort and love, anything was possible. Dead ground could come back to life. Broken hearts could heal. Impossible dreams could become reality. As Clara lay in bed that night, James's arms around her, she felt the deep contentment of a life well lived. She had faced her fears and overcome them. She had taken risks and been rewarded. She had loved deeply and been loved in return. She had worked hard and seen the fruits of her labor. She had done what she set out to do. She had made something grow where everyone said nothing would. And in doing so, she had made herself grow too, into someone stronger and braver and more complete than she had ever imagined she could be. The story of Clara Brennan Wilder would be told in redemption for generations. The woman who had refused to accept defeat. The woman who had brought dead ground back to life. The woman who had saved a town by saving herself. But Clara was not thinking about her legacy as she drifted off to sleep. She was thinking about tomorrow, about the work that would need to be done, about the life that would continue to unfold. She was thinking about her husband and her children, about the land she loved, about the endless possibilities that lay ahead. She was thinking about seeds and soil and sun and rain, about the miracle of growth, about the way life persisted against all odds. She was thinking about love and partnership and community and hope, and she was grateful. Grateful for every moment, every challenge, every triumph. Grateful for the journey that had brought her here, to this place, this life, this love. As sleep claimed her, Clara smiled. She had planted seeds in dead ground, and they had grown beyond her wildest dreams. They had grown into a life worth living, into a love worth cherishing, into a future worth believing in. And that was everything. That was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything she had ever wanted and everything she had never known to want. It was home.